Morning. Welcome, everyone, to the Thursday, March 7th Board of Forestry Hybrid Public Meeting. Again, for the record, I'm Jim Kelly, Chair of the State Board of Forestry. Today's work session will be streamed live to YouTube. To make sure our viewers online can follow along with our proceedings online, I'll go over some best meeting practices. Everyone participating in the virtual and physical meeting room, please silence your cell phones and try to limit background noises. For online participants, remember to mute yourself when you are not speaking and disable your video when not engaging on a topic. We ask everyone participating to state their names using the available microphones so that those listening online can track our commentary. If you experience technical issues in the virtual meeting room, use the chat function in Zoom to connect with our ODF host during this event. For those viewing the live stream and present in this room, we will continue our standard business meeting order of operations. For today, the public can offer remarks on item number 7, and we are asking all testimony providers to limit their comments to 2 minutes, whether remarking in person or remotely. We do understand that this is not a lot of time, but if you would like to share more information with the board, we recommend sending in written testimony for the March 2-day meeting. To enter it into the record, please send in your comments by March 20th to the Board of Forestry at odf.oregon.gov email. With any questions so far? Okay, I'll go ahead and perform a roll call of the board. Liz Akpawa?
Chair Kelly, I am present.
Carla Chambers?
Here.
Ben Doimling?
Here.
Shonda Ferrari?
Here.
Joe Justice?
Here.
Brenda McComb?
Here.
And obviously I'm here as well. To start our Thursday, I want to welcome Ms. Perez for item 6, the MGO implementation plan closeout. I think what everybody's been waiting for. Sabrina, are you ready to begin?
Yes, thank you, Chair Kelly, members of the board, State Forester Mokomoto. My name is Sabrina Perez. I'm the Senior Strategy Manager for the Administrative Branch, and it's my pleasure today to present our department's implementation of the 28 recommendations provided by MGO. Joining me today, I have Linda Hurley and Shawnee Pickney Forrester from Macias, Gini, and O'Connell, also known as MGO. I'll let them further present and introduce themselves as we walk through our presentation. We do have a presentation that will be brought up here shortly. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Linda Hurley. I'm a partner with Macias, Gini, and O'Connell, and I have served as the engagement oversight for the last, well, we've been here a little bit over 4 years. And it's been a journey with management and various individuals throughout your organization to really look at the operational effectiveness and to address all the recommendations that we had in our initial report. So we appreciate the opportunity to present to you today and to tell you where we are and that closeout of these 28 recommendations. So if we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so we're just going to recap for you today a review of what our objective was for this portion of the engagement, the implementation status, and highlights on where the department is in their implementation process. And then we're going to close out with Sabrina giving an overall management summary with the department's perspective. Next slide, please. Okay, so this portion of our engagement, this is actually the second engagement we have with ODF, and that was really monitoring and evaluating the department's implementation of the 28 recommendations. So we assisted the department in prioritizing those recommendations, basically looking at the level of risk, and we evaluated and presented those in our initial report as either high risk, medium risk, or low risk. And then there is the level of difficulty of implementation. And so we worked with Sabrina as the lead liaison to our team to identify and prioritize what needs to be reviewed in our various cycles of review. We also evaluated any documentation to resolve the recommendations and to determine whether or not it was adequate to meet the objectives. And finally, we're summarizing the status and providing any additional insights for you. Next slide, please. All right, so we've completed 4 review cycles covering the period of October 2021 through this year, February 2024. We've noted that ODF has improved its accounts receivable and accounts payable practices, so they're much more effective than they were previously in terms of identifying these items in a timely basis. ODF has evaluated and reorganized its department structure to better utilize the existing resources. So there's a lot that needed to be evaluated in terms of reporting structure, who has responsibility for functions and whatnot. And so there was a look at that and basically a reorganization for more effective use of the resources. The next step, and we've highlighted this in our closeout report, is we were evaluating your organizational maturity. So to move forward in that organizational maturity, it's going to involve automation of key processes. So the governance has been looked at, the process itself has been looked at, but there's opportunities to continue to improve through automation. And then finally, advanced levels of organization maturity requires an investment in technology. And so those are things that this board is going to have to decide how you want to spend the resources that you have and what the cost benefit is for implementing new and more mature technologies. Next slide, please. So this is the status as of today of the 28 recommendations. 21 of them have been fully implemented. 3 are substantially complete and 4 in progress. And in the next couple of slides, we have listed which ones represent each category. So there's substantial work that has been done by the organization to really improve based on our initial report. Next slide, please. So these next 2 slides are the recommendations that have been implemented. And as you can see in our initial report, many of these items, well, actually all of the items on this particular slide, were all considered high risk. So there was very much of a high risk within the organization that these areas were not operating effectively, efficiently. And so there's a lot of work, and you can see that most of them have been reduced to a low risk as part of the overall implementation. There's a few that are still in the medium risk area, but again, those are related to technology areas and whether or not you're going to implement additional solutions for those. But your governance, your policies and procedures, oversight, reconciliations, all of those items have been substantially improved. And so we considered these recommendations listed here as being fully implemented. Next slide. This is a continuation of implemented. These most of these were a little bit on the lesser risk scale in the medium risk category, but you can see that, again, most all of these have gotten to the low area with the full implementation. Next slide. So there are 3 that are substantially complete, but there are still a few areas that need to be addressed for us to consider them fully complete, or management to consider fully complete. So the cash flow projections, although there's been some great improvements in tracking that information and being able to look forward where challenges before you couldn't really project that cash. You didn't know what was coming in, the timing of when it was coming in, what was due. If, for example, there was quite a few invoices that may have came in years after fire incidents have occurred. All of that has been substantially improved to capture that information overall. But there's still some opportunity there to be able to fully project out cash flows. And I think this is really an area of modeling If you were to make this decision, what happens? If you were to make this decision, what happens? And so management is still working on defining a tool that can help with answering those questions. The financial accounting skill sets, this goes back to the organizational resources and whether or not you have the right people in the right places, and continuing to invest in those resources. An area that we had identified was just making sure that fire finance folks, especially assigned to the districts, really understood what their role was of capturing information. So there's a lot of changes that have been made to have better oversight over this particular area. And then finally, FEMA claiming, it's very complex and often takes years to close out. So they're still working through some processes to make that the most effective it can be. Next slide. These last 4 recommendations, they're still in progress. And again, a lot of them center around just defining and figuring out what your final technology solutions are going to be and what kind of investment that you want to make in that particular area. So a lot of work has been done. However, there's still more that needs to be done as you decide what those technology solutions should be going forward. Next slide. All right, so that concludes our remarks. We can answer any specific questions on any of those recommendations. I have my colleague Shanae Pickney-Forrest with me that has done most of the work in terms of the detail with ODF. But Sabrina, do you want to close out and then we can answer questions?
Yes, thank you, Linda. Board members, it is my pleasure to be here to have this opportunity to present and reflect upon our department's implementation here. This has been a 4-year-long project, and being able to be here from day one and working with MGO has been a true opportunity and something that I will hold dear as it shapes our work continually for years to come. At the onset of our receiving the 28 recommendations, we received board and legislative direction to implement all 28 recommendations, as well as to mitigate the highest risk recommendations. And it is exciting to be here to share that we have addressed all 28 recommendations. All 28 have moved through a steady state of completion. There's deliverables that are documented and packaged here to show our progress in doing that. And it has fundamentally shaped our business practices as a foundation for many years to come. Mitigating those highest risk recommendations, that is a win for us. It was very directly shared that we address those and get them taken care of. We have absolutely done that. So in that 4 years, the successes that we have seen through that is our improved internal controls. That is directly looking at the control environment, setting our parameters for our governance and oversight responsibilities. Through that governance, it is not only through our policies and procedures, but also in our IT technology structure. We have established an IT steering committee now with members of our executive team there to provide that high-level oversight. We have governance policies within IT as well, and a recent IT strategic plan. And I highlight IT as the realm of understanding that that is truly the next step for us in moving through to a higher level of organizational maturity. The limitations for some of these recommendations and why they haven't been fully implemented does get into a realm of IT. And so we have progressed through that maturity level from when we started back in 2019 and the 2019 and 20 with the original assessment stage of this and the recommendations provided in 2021. The movement in how it has progressed through the levels of organizational maturity is significant and to be recognized. It's also been, implementing the MGO recommendations has been a highest priority of the agency for many years, and that has been defined well and from the tone at the top set by our state forester, our former state foresters as well, and acting state forester Nancy Hirsch too. And recognizing that clear tone at the top and setting those clear staff expectations of making this a priority was significant for us. It helped us better define our authority and responsibilities all the way through in improving our policies and procedures, as well as our improved communication structure. Another limitation I would say in implementing some of these recommendations is truly just recognizing the partnerships that we have with other agencies, whether it be our federal agencies or state agency partners. It requires a lot of work over multiple years to bring some of these FEMA claims to closure, bring the funding in through, and the improved communication and oversight between our agencies has really been a success story to help those move along. I want to recognize that implementing these recommendations, while we've met many successes, it's not been without the challenges. And from the beginning, I've presented our challenges as opportunities. And I would truly capture our organizational changes that we've went through as extremely challenging. Some of the recommendations in particular have changed our organization so fundamentally in a way that has impacted our employees. The trajectory of their careers completely changed. Our organization has moved in ways that have altered the way that we do business significantly, perpetually from here. And so recognizing that challenge and the impact it has on our employees in making those, it's also an opportunity. We've learned how we can do business better. We have learned how to better codify our structures and our business processes, to make that better connection and alignment between our field district offices and central headquarters here. We do have further opportunity in front of us to invest in our technology to overcome those limitations and proceed through greater organizational maturity. I look forward to working with you all in the future to seek those funding opportunities, as well as come forward and speak about the progress that we've made internally within our application development teams here to bring automation to those business processes. I'm poised here to talk that we are also planning actively right now for our post-implementation monitoring. The closure of this project is not the closure of our work on these recommendations, nor the closure of continued monitoring to ensure that the changes and improvements that have been made to our business practices are continuing from here on out. We will have annual after-action reviews to look at our business practices through our regular auditing. We do have an audit committee. Members of the board are on that, as well as external state partner agencies that are helping to define our different priorities for auditing. We also have an internal vacancy right now for an internal auditor, and we'll be working with MGO on some ideas for how we can improve our auditing function. And lastly, I just really want to recognize the employees that have done this work. I am lucky to be here to present on their behalf, but truly the work and dedication that they have done, bringing their skills and expertise to the table, is really what needs to be recognized here. I am simply here to help showcase the work, and it is their hard work and dedication over the years that have made this a success. And MGO, I'd really like to thank you for all of the work that you've done, your technical expertise. I have learned so much myself in implementing audit recommendations and then understanding how the different levels of organizational maturity reflect how the observations could be mitigated within our organization, and just really working with you to understand how we can improve our business practices. It's been a wonderful experience, and I thank you so much. And with that, that is all of the comments that I came here prepared, but I do want to recognize that MGO is here for your questions, and I'll continue to be here to answer anything as well.
Okay, Sabrina, thank you. I'm sure this board will have a few questions, and I do, so I'll start with mine. I mean, the board is keenly aware that this organization still has a financial insecurity that we can't solve, that we will have to turn to the legislature someday. But with that exception, and I'm sure MGO has worked with other state agencies and other government agencies, probably of similar size. Can you give us an overall scorecard, and if you were looking at this agency in terms of its finances and its IT in particular versus your other experiences that are comparable, assuming that you have them?
I think from a scorecard perspective, you've substantially come up since I've been here.
I think we might have been in the D minus.
You could have been. No, I think, one of the things early on was to look at technology solutions. And right off the bat, immediately, you identified specifically an AR system, and you didn't have accounts receivable tracking from an automated standpoint. It was guessing. It was a guessing game. So I think you have folks that are within the organization that understand the need for technology and have ideas. And so from a scorecard perspective, you are definitely improving on a daily basis. I don't know if I can necessarily give you a score overall, because there's still some things that needs to be looked at. But the first thing is acknowledging that you need something. And that acknowledgement has happened. And then it's identifying, well, how can you implement those solutions? And so there was a number of solutions, and including the state systems. It's better understanding how the department needs to integrate with the overall state systems, because there are certain systems that you have to use. And there was a lack of understanding across the department on how to best utilize those systems and get information. And part of implementing these items was an evaluation of how that utilization could be better. And that has been done. And so now today you have the inventory of what you have and how things are being used. And there's a streamlining of that technology as well. When we first started, to give you some additional perspective, we went out to, I think, almost every single fire district throughout the state. And I had an audit team visit them and understand what they were doing. And there were so many one-off processes. And, there were systems and applications being used that ODF administration didn't know about. And then that leads into, is your data secure? How do you manage that data? And a lot of that, as of today, has been addressed, and that inventory has been taken. The responsibility of your IT team in terms of oversight and use has been significantly improved with that understanding. And so now it's looking at, what are those, I don't want to say final, but what's the next step in that technology? And, cash flow projection is a big one. It's very much a big one. And then making sure that you have regular reporting on finances that can be drilled down depending on the lens and perspective that you want to look at, whether that is in Cal's chair as a state forester, looking at the organization overall. You have his administrative staff, whether that's finance or operations, And then you have the district level and really understanding that. So that's an area, I think, within the recommendations that there was mentioned, the BRIO reporting, and that's really the ad hoc reporting to better understand those, what's happening in each of those lenses. And so that's still being addressed, but there's definitely a more holistic understanding at administration of what's really going on in the districts. And that is a significant improvement. And, I would definitely give you a higher grade. You're out of the D category. Maybe we're more in B plus, A minus area, but there's still some work.
Yeah.
There's still some work and decisions that need to be made.
Thank you. Other questions? Carla?
Well, you ladies are my heroes. So Linda and Sabrina, I can't thank you enough. And I didn't get your first name.
Shanae.
Shanae, thank you. I went down on one of our big fires and went into the fire tent and talked to all the people on finance and got their backgrounds. And I just knew we had to strengthen this area. And, when that first MGO coming out of Ways and Means fully supported that, and we went back and asked them to continue support. So I can't thank you enough because I realize how much you have strengthened our systems. My question, and I couldn't agree more, comes to cash flow projections and the policy. We sit and make policy decisions and have no idea if we're putting ourselves out of business because we're not correlating policy decisions with how it's going to impact the agency. But that cash flow projection, I think, is essential to us. I am still very concerned about our cash position in general. We're sitting here with the majority of our accounts receivable is sitting here over 120 days out. And this FEMA process, which we understand is pretty deadly, it just drags us out. And is there anything technology-wise that we can do? Do you have any observations at all as we sit here with $105 million that hasn't been invoiced from previous year's fires? So, that accounts receivable is growing. Our cash position, I know we've got people now losing sleep about it because they're watching it within the organization. And would you like to address that beyond just the cash projection itself?
Yeah, well, I think that you've definitely gotten some improvements. Sabrina mentioned communication, and one of the struggles is making sure that you had all your partners on board in a timely basis to understand, especially the after action. And one of the things that we identified initially is that there was no after action on finance. So it was all focused on operations. And so that is a significant improvement in terms of understanding who's responsible for what and how you do these settlements. And there wasn't a lot of oversight over the settlements as well, the agreements. And so that has been placed into structure that now administration needs to sign off on those settlement agreements with your partner agencies. The timing is always a challenge with the federal government. I mean, you're not the only organization that struggles with the FEMA collections and the filing of that information. And then, they want your firstborn before they're going to pay you, essentially. So, I don't necessarily know how to address the timing of FEMA being able to pay, but from your cash projection perspective, you're going to have to identify some form of application and system that I know management is working on. It can't be done in Excel, basic, Excel modeling, because this organization is so complex with their budgeting, with how the funding comes in, whether it's from the general fund at the state level, whether it's from, some of the districts themselves and how that, how folks are billed and whatnot. So there's definitely a complex layer. Then when you're trying to inject policy decisions, that makes it very difficult. And so we attempted a couple of modeling projects with Excel, and it's just not going to work. So that is something I know that management is exploring. There are certain applications and systems that you have that have cash flow modelings, but it's the effort that goes into making sure that you're building it appropriately for your organization. So do you have something you want to add regarding just where you are in that assessment?
Yes, thank you, Linda. I would recognize that we have come a long ways in being able to accurately project our cash flow. There, at the beginning, at the onset of this, there were a lot of items such as, invoices that we would not expect to see from our partner agencies for many years to come. And now we are in a level of being able to project and capture those in time to better allocate those funds and recognize what our true costs of fire season are going to be on a day-to-day basis. And so we have done the work to codify the business practices, and that foundation is there. We now have eyes on the funds in a way that we did not have before. The additional automation features in bringing to a different level of a technology system is still desired within the agency. We have a lot to benefit from that. We've also positioned some resources within our IT program to do that work internally on some solutions. And I can't not recognize as well, in working with our partner agencies and recognizing it is a challenge with the funding structure, there are other policy decisions and initiatives underway that could also provide a different solution or relief to our cash flow in fire funding overall that are beyond our borders and our scope to address here. But I recognize that they would greatly change our business practices too. So any solution that we do implement, because it is such a complex system, also needs to be easily adapted and flexible for continual changes that may be on the horizon to our fire funding.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you all for the work that you've done and the progress that you've made. It's really, really remarkable, so thank you. When I and Jim and Joe came on the board about 5.5 years ago, there was a request, I think an expectation that we have the ability to drill down, and I think you just mentioned that, drill down into various aspects of the agency and really understand both at a high level, but then be able to drill down and see at a lower level really what's going on in terms of finances and expenditures and cash flow. And I'm wondering, it sounds like that's still an aspiration. Any sense for when will we see that before we cycle off the board?
Thank you, Board Member McComb. I would like to see that as well. We have definitely needed to do some work internally within our IT, as well as implement some organizational changes to ensure that our IT programs are on the appropriate trajectory with the state government enterprise. And so with those state systems, as well as our internal opportunities we have to create some automation within our business practices, I do see too that visual schematic that you would like to see. I would love to have that in our agency, as well as many others, that high level of reporting and ability to drill down. We have in our kind of earlier couple years ago, we had a prototype, and we had put that a little bit on pause as we went through some significant leadership transitions. We've now also organizationally moved our IT program under IT to provide that high level governance and oversight. And we have now filled the positions for our IT developers to be able to carry out and go after that vision. A lot of this work is just now in time. Some of the governance structure work and filling of those positions and getting our visions for financial reporting even has recently gone through that IT governance structure, went through the steering committee, been approved as a project for moving forward. So it's really in its early project implementation. I can't speak to exactly the timeline. I do know that they've developed out a phased approach for incremental development as to be expected, but I certainly hope we can bring that forward to you.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Other questions? No. Sabrina, MGO, I don't think people in your position very often get a round of applause, but I'm going to suggest that this board give you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do a quick, just 5-minute break here before we go on to our next item. And so let's get back here early, 5 minutes at 8:40. Okay, we're going to move on to item 7, the state forester recommendation regarding state forest draft habitat conservation plan for Western Oregon. I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge how dynamic this issue is for many and how passionate Oregonians are about public forest land. This public meeting space is open to all who are interested in engaging with the board and the department, and we appreciate everyone coming together to continue making these public policy spaces safe for all that attend. Therefore, I ask all of those in attendance today to be courteous throughout the proceedings, silence all devices, and please refrain from side conversations as we hear from the state forester and while the board deliberates. I trust that we can maintain civil discourse among the board, and I appreciate the respectful nature of our public meetings over the years. And I just, I want to say, I know that we're not all going to agree today, board members, and I also know that we agree on far more than we disagree about. And I know we all have the best interest of all Oregonians. And so we're going to get through this today. And I hope that we will be able to preserve our ability to be a high-functioning board. And I know it's going to be challenging. So before we begin, I would like to ask if anybody has a conflict or an appearance of a conflict on item 7. Ben Doimler.
Thank you, Chair Kelly. I'm Ben Doimling for the records. I have a potential conflict of interest in that I do business with Hampton Lumber. We sell logs to them occasionally, and so there is a business relationship with a party that's intimately involved in this process.
Thank you. Any others?
I don't view this as a conflict, but I do serve on the Hampton board.
Okay, well, that's the idea is whether it's a conflict or the appearance of a conflict, and that certainly would qualify as an appearance of conflict, if not a conflict. Thank you. Okay. And I appreciate those declarations. Hey, Forester Mukamoto, are you ready to begin? Yes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Kelly and the Board of Forestry, and I thank everyone who's attending today. I am here today to provide the board with my recommendation as the state forester regarding next steps for the Habitat Conservation Plan for Western Oregon State Forests. First, I deeply appreciate all the input Oregonians have shared with us on this Habitat Conservation Plan. In just over 2 years since I became state forester, we have heard more than 16.5 hours, 2 full business days of verbal testimony and received nearly 200 pieces of written testimony. I continue to receive emails to this day, just a minute ago. There have been also more than 10,000 emails sent to the board and department as part of the various advocacy email campaigns. That volume of input alone is impressive, but even more impactful to me is how much passion we've seen for Oregon state forests and communities. I've recently had the opportunity to host a few listening sessions to provide people with an opportunity to share their thoughts about the updated modeling data shared with the board late last year. I'm especially appreciative of the more than 150 Oregonians who came out to talk with me about what they value about their state forests at these sessions and emailed me. I have to say that with the diverse and the emotional ties to many of the positions that the people who did testify took, I walked away with a very high impression of the people participating, and that they were respectful, and they were respectful of the session, they were respectful of the process, and I think that speaks well of Oregonians. Second, I've heard and understand the concerns about the impacts of local communities, and I acknowledge the significant economic and employment impacts of reduced harvest on state forest lands. But the department is committed to working with trust land counties as we continue to develop the forest management plan on exploring implementation options on the create a glide path in harvest volumes to provide the counties with as much time as possible to plan and prepare for economic changes. I'm also well aware of the budgetary implications for our state forest division. Division leadership is actively reviewing its business strategies and processes and exploring options to improve operational efficiency and sustainability. However, we must acknowledge that the division has long struggled with a funding gap due to the current revenue distribution model. These revenues are also the sole revenue source for accomplishing all aspects of the greatest permanent value. Was that last call? Okay. You know, however, I believe that there is no version of an HCP that provides all the harvest flexibility a forest manager may desire that still meets permit issuing requirements. This is true of all of the HCPs currently under construction, the Elliott, the private forest accord, and this one. This is based on a number of conversations, which include discussions with federal services, forest industry, environmental stakeholders, and my staff. It would be easy for me to kick the can down the road for the next state forester or future board members to have to deal with. But that doesn't help the department or communities that rely upon state forest lands for a variety of benefits. I'm also feeling that time is of the essence with the Coho decision lurking out there in 2028 and the time it takes to plan for a new habitat conservation plan. This draft habitat conservation plan complies with the Federal Endangered Species Act by recognizing that forest management activities may have adverse effects on covered species and offsets those potential impacts that planned deliberate conservation measures with planned deliberate conservation measures. This agreement ensures species protection and stability in harvest levels for 70 years. Essentially, it is an insurance policy for our working forest lands. While we cannot know for sure if this HCP will ultimately meet the criteria for issuance of incidental take permits until the federal services biological opinions are complete, the robust process that got us to this point gives me confidence that it will. It is difficult for many people to understand how reducing harvest volumes is a good business decision. The crux of the decision is the value of the certainty that comes with federal ESA compliance for the department and the trust counties. It would provide us with a more stable environment to operate in, regardless of the future species listings or increased restrictions under the federal ESA. The current approach of take avoidance that guides our operational policies, although very thoughtfully designed, cannot ensure that we do not take threatened and endangered species. This opens the agency up to immense legal and operational risks, both of which carry real and unpredictable financial and revenue impacts. And remember, it's not enough to try our best, but still occasionally take a species. The law is very clear that even incidental take is prohibited outside of an HCP. I'd also like to point out that although there is a clear distinction between federal ESA compliance and the attainment of greatest permanent value, the forests and aquatic ecosystems that we will be conserving and enhancing under this HCP will have habitat components that support many more native fish and wildlife species beyond the 17 species covered by the HCP. So, because time is of the essence, I recommend that the Board of Forestry direct the Department of Forestry to 1, take actions necessary to finalize the Western Oregon State Forest Habitat Conservation Plan as drafted and worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries to complete the HCP and obtain the associated incidental take permits. Completion of the HCP will include minor changes made since the release of the public draft in March 2021 and other minor changes needed to obtain the incidental take permits. It will not include significant changes to the conservation actions as currently drafted. And two, model management outcomes that the board can use to discuss trade-offs and inform the setting of performance smart measure targets to be used to direct initial implementation of the forest management plan that relies upon the HCP for Endangered Species Act compliance. So, Chair Kelly, that's my recommendation. Submit it to you.
Thank you, Cal. So next, let's take time to hear testimony from the public. Before we begin, I want to offer a few suggestions. When providing comments, try to endorse or support rather than repeat the testimony of others. Submit written testimony to accompany your statements or information, and that can be sent up until March 20th. Try to honor you and your neighbor's time. Please be prepared and deliver your remarks within the allotted time. Assume and practice good intent with each other. Have some grace and understanding as we make it through today's testimony. Okay. Hillary, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Almost had a mic check moment there. But that's just actually a good way to segue. For everyone who's going to be joining us today, just a friendly reminder to place that mic within about 6 to 8 inches from your mouth, just so we can hear you clearly online. I'll do a friendly reminder also for the board as well. Chair Kelly, State Forester Mukomoto, and members of the board, we have 15 people signed up to provide testimony for item 7. Everyone in the queue, thank you so much for joining us. I can't turn around and use the microphone, so know that I'm talking to you. We just want to say thank you so much for coming out. I will try to list everybody in a set order and just call on each of you to begin your testimony, but please be prepared to engage when your name's called on. When you begin, a timer will be displayed for 2 minutes. When you see that timer run out, we do ask that you provide your closing comment. To start us off, we actually have majority of the people joining us in person today, so we're not going to use this virtual outside of the timer. So I'll go ahead and provide the names in sets of 4. So I'll start it off with 1 set, and then I'll tell you who's on deck is the second set. The first set will ask you to proceed to the front table here in these 4 chairs and use the microphone in front of you. The first set is Representative Cyrus Chavardi, Representative Virgil Osborne, Brenna Bell, Michael Lang. Second set is Chris Edwards, Joseph Yoren, Shailene Bangs, Ty Williams. Okay, well, we'll proceed. Thank you for that note. All right, Rep. Javadi, please begin.
Okay, so I'll try that again. My name is Representative Cyrus Javity, House District 32, representing Clatsop County, Tillamook County, the city of Clatskanie. Glad to be here. This is not the first time. I'm going to try not to repeat the same testimony. It's good to see you, Cal, Chair Kelly. I'm honored to be here. I'm here today because I represent the people of the district in Clatsop and Tillamook County and Clatskanie who make a living taking care of our forests. I know you've heard hours, hundreds of hours of testimony from these loggers and their families. You can see today they drove hours to get here with their equipment to protest the adoption of the current version of the Habitat Conservation Plan. As I've listened to these meetings and as I've sat in the Capitol and listened to my constituents come and as I've read their emails from both sides, part of my concern is that there's confusion over this issue. There is one side who thinks that if we don't adopt what's at stake is that we're not going to adopt the HCP. And they seem to think that it's an all or nothing. I know you know this isn't true, but The stakes here are too high to get the messaging wrong on this. The people in our district depend on their livelihoods for this. They're fourth and fifth generation loggers whose lives are going to be turned upside down because of the dramatic reduction in harvest levels. This will, and we'll hear from others, this will have devastating impacts on our counties. And what disturbs me the most, as we've gone through this and we've said it over and over, there are other alternatives. And it seems like some of those alternatives have been passed over because for political reasons, which is honestly disheartening when real lives are at stake for political reasons. I know that it's not the intention of the board necessarily to do that, but the fact remains that that's what's at stake here. I'm reminded of, I got 6, I'm over, but I wanted to just leave you with one thought before I end here. And in the spirit of seeking solutions that are both prudent and pragmatic, I'm reminded of the words of Ronald Reagan, a champion of conservative principles, who once said, "Preservation of our environment is not a liberal or a conservative challenge. It's common sense." Let us apply this common sense to our deliberations today. We must strive for a plan that safeguards our natural heritage while ensuring that the economic well-being and prosperity of our citizens. Thank you for listening to me. I know that this plan is probably fully cooked at this point, but if it's not, I advise and recommend that we reconsider the other alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Up next, Representative Osborne.
Thank you. Virgil Osborne, Representative, State Representative, House District 2 from Douglas County. Roseburg, Oregon is my hometown, timber capital of the world. And I've grown up in Oregon, and I lived there my whole life. And I'd be remiss if I wasn't here today to defend our timber industry. In my town, in my district, it is what runs our economy. And although there may not be as many state lands as we have in other districts, this is something that the state is really going to hurt from if we're not careful here. And when I'm testifying on the House floor on many other bills, I always say we need to really be careful with unintended consequences. And I think that some of where we're headed with this is going to have unintended consequences that are going to affect our state economy and affect our workers for years to come, maybe put people out of business. I implore you to please think about that and take that into consideration before you make any decisions on this. And at the very least, do less harm. We owe it to our timber industry. Our timber industry is what supports our state. We are the timber capital of the world, and we're slowly, well, I would say quickly losing that. And we're kind of kowtowing down to political pressures, environmental pressures. But we're here too. And we have to take care of our timber industry and our economy and our people. So I implore you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you guys today. I know it's I'll keep it short. And I appreciate every one of those guys that's out there in the driveway and all those log trucks. And they mean something to me. And I also noticed that all those logs that are on all those trucks they come from state lands. So that's something to be considered. Those are going to go away. We're going to damage that considerably if we're not careful here. So please be considerate of that, and thank you for the time. Thank you, Cal, too.
Thank you. Up next, Annabelle.
Good morning, Chair Kelly, members of the board, and State Forester Mukomoto. My name is Brenna Bell, and I'm the Forest Climate Manager for 350 PDX. I'm also an environmental attorney and a 6th-generation Oregonian. Over the past few years, been here a lot, and I've noticed the talk about the HCP has grown increasingly political and implies that ODF has significant discretion to determine how much forest can be logged. But that misses the whole point. The core issues here are not economic or political. They are scientific and legal, centered on ODF's obligation to comply with the Endangered Species Act. We just heard about unintended consequences. One of the unintended consequences of Oregon's history of logging is that a lot of species in this state are now listed on the ESA, and is our obligation, our federal obligation, to protect them. As you know, listed species are given protection against unauthorized take, which includes altering habitat in such a way that leads to injury or death. And non-federal activities that have the potential to harm a listed species can move forward if they have a federal incidental take permit because they created and adopted a habitat conservation plan. That's where we're at now. But before approving an HCP, The federal services must be confident that the applicant will minimize and mitigate the impacts of incidental taking to the maximum extent practicable, and that the take will not reduce the likelihood and survival of the recovery of the species. As you know, I have concerns with this HCP too. I don't think it goes far enough in looking at climate resiliency, but I think it does meet the mandatory minimum that the federal actors are going to look at. I think it can be approved. Because the decision maker here is not really ODF, right? It's the US Fish and Wildlife Service and NIMS. HCP or not, you have to comply with the ESA. And the NEPA analysis for this HCP found that over the next 70 years, it will both produce more commercial timber and create more stability for communities and the species. It does seem like something that everyone could get behind, but in the end, it doesn't really matter if the public likes it. What matters is that ODF complies with the ESA, and it's your responsibility to ensure that happens. So I advocate for you to accept State Forester Mukomoto's recommendation and vote yes on this HCP.
Thank you. Up next is Michael Lang.
Good morning, Chair Kelly and members of the Board of Forestry and State Forester. My name's Michael Lang. I'm with the Wild Salmon Center. On behalf of the State Forest Coalition, we thank you for managing state forests for the greatest permanent value for all Oregonians, complying with the mandatory requirements of the Endangered Species Act, and directing staff to work with federal agencies to finalize the HCP. After decades of overharvest, the HCP is a necessary step to stop the decline of imperiled salmon and wildlife and comply with the ESA. According to ODF estimates, many counties will not be negatively affected by this HCP. In fact, Tillamook County, home to the state's largest state forest, will not see a decline in harvest according to ODF harvest projections. We support efforts by Governor Kotek to identify resources to address any reductions in revenue where needed. Ultimately, we support solutions that do not pit essential services against the health of our state forests. Contrary to industry claims, mill capacity is expanding in Oregon. Recently, $1 billion, more than that, has been invested in expansion of mills in the state. The significant expansion contradicts timber industry claims that the HCP is causing mill closures and industry contraction. For example, in 2023, Hampton Lumber announced a $150 million investment in modernizing its mill in Willamina, 40 miles away from the Banks Mill, which I'm sure you've all heard about, has closed down. They're also receiving tax breaks and other incentives. So in conclusion, we support the state forester's recommendation, and we hope for your support as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Please return to your seats if you like. Okay, up next is Chris Edwards, Joseph Yoren, Shailene Bangs, Ty Williams. On deck will be Karen Schmitlin, Bill Turner, Casey Kula, and Heath Curtis. Chris, ready when you, and don't forget to hit that button until it turns green.
All right. Chris Edwards, representing Oregon Forest and Industries Council, State Forester Mukomoto, Chair Kelly, members of the board. Thanks for the opportunity to testify in what appears as will be the final opportunity to weigh in on this habitat conservation plan. And you've had a lot of process, and we appreciate the process. And but there doesn't seem like there's been a whole lot of change. And I know you've heard from the public, 16 and a half hours of testimony, over 200 pieces of written submissions. And yet the plan that's in front of you still, in our view, fails to meet those twin goals of species protection and financial viability for communities and families. And so while we respect and appreciate the process that you've allowed to happen for public input, it doesn't seem that any amount of process is actually going to change the outcome if you don't really dig into the actual plan or consider some of the other options that have been on the table. And there are other options that could be on the table that conserve species and protect our capacity to build or to grow carbon-friendly building materials. And we all know that we need more of those. Less of those increases the price. More of those lowers the price. Ultimately, to meet the challenges of the growing need for these carbon-friendly building materials and protecting wildlife, really the mandate for an uncertain future is that you insist that plans that we do the work to get plans that do both. And it just doesn't seem like that that mandate has really been driven through the department to produce that sort of a plan. If you don't, I'll skip to the end. Please don't let this be yet another decision in what is a growing list of decisions in the state of Oregon that seem to be unbalanced, if not ideologically driven. It hasn't been working really well for the state. And I think that really you have the opportunity to provide some leadership and stand up and create a plan that will work for all interests. But it's going to take your leadership to do so. So thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Chris. Up next, Joseph.
Good morning. Joseph Yorn, Audubon Society of Lincoln City. As Forest Policy Director for our chapter, I've participated in planning meetings, stakeholder group meetings, joint stakeholder meetings, review meetings, ad hoc conservation committee meetings, surveys, and now the listening sessions during ODF's development of the proposed HCP for state forests. Over the last 4 years, we have presented written and verbal comments to you many, many times regarding the proposed HCP for Western Oregon state forests. To emphasize just how much this HCP is a compromise, I want to document what we have asked for that will not be included if you choose to accept State Forester's recommendation. We ask that you pursue alternative three, because ODF staff told us it provided greater conservation value for the 17 affected species. We ask that HCAs be expanded to reduce edge effects and to increase contiguity in upland areas to reflect the science correlating bird species recovery with the size of habitat reserves. We ask that all known activity centers for northern spotted owls and marbled murrelets be included within the HCA boundaries, because ODF staff told us that doing so would cause only minor changes in economic outcomes. As primarily a birding and wildlife watching community, we are saddened that these things will not come to pass under the current proposal. But hey, that's the nature of compromise. We just wish everyone would recognize that fact. I'd like to thank you all, members of the Oregon Board of Forestry, State Forester Mukomoto, and ODF State Forest Division staff, Mike Wilson, Nick Pelizzotto, Cindy Kolomachek, Ron Zilli, and all the others for your patience and professionalism, for your work and your dedication in trying to meet your responsibilities under the ESA. I know you've done your homework. I know you've sorted the wheat from the chaff, the facts from the fabrications, and the projected realities from the hyperbolic rhetoric. Good luck. We look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Jalen.
Dear board members and chair, my name is Shaylin Bangs, Astoria, Oregon. It's clear to me that the future hardships of the people in my community are being disregarded by the majority of this board. Comments have been made that this HCP is the best that you can get. That's a lie. If you look back at the mountain of testimony and new information, you know it's not the best you can do. Moving forward with this HCP, this board will be cutting jobs and funding to schools and social and emergency services. Kids will lose access to music, foreign languages, or schools will have to close entirely. It isn't the legislature doing this, it's you. Each of you are making this decision without a funding action from legislature. I wish you wait until funding is established, because what will happen if it didn't? Who would be to blame? It'll be you. When there is no money for us to provide children's mental health services, care center beds, or law enforcement, you will be responsible. Conserving a little over 1% of Oregon's land won't bring back salmon or spotted owl when the giant amount of federal reserve lands could not. It will not make a dent in climate change. It will, however, destroy jobs in rural communities where these forests reside. Please do the right thing. Take time to fix the plan. If not, then recognize that this is your decision and you can't lay blame on staff, the governor, or legislature when it all falls apart. Recognize that the impact to my community could have been avoided, but you decided that we don't deserve it. What about my habitat? What about my home? Thank you for your time.
Chair Kelly, board members, and State Forester Makamoto. My name is Ty Williams. I'm a lifelong Clatsop County resident. I spent 32 years working for ODF, retiring in July of 2023. For the last 27 years, I worked in state forests and retired as the Astoria District Operations Coordinator. I'm here to encourage the board to take the additional time to make adjustments to the proposed plan to provide a better balance with economics and the greatest permanent value rule. The current plan as proposed achieves the 70-year terrestrial habitat goal in the first period. This alone is an indication of lack of balance in the proposed plan. The flaw in this process was not having the right people at the table at the right time. Unlike the HCP exercise in the early 2000s that had foresters with operational knowledge and experience at the table alongside biologists and other resource specialists, this process lacked operational expertise at critical junctures. In turn, many trade-offs and ramifications were not realized. One example is the 20,000 acres of inoperable ground in the Tillamook district that wasn't included in the HCA, even though it was the same timber type of the operable adjacent acreage that was included. An operational forester would have been able to point out the lack of perceived use by teeny species was simply due to no surveys conducted in this area because of its inoperability. Based on my professional experience, I do not believe the proposed plan can meet the financial commitment required by the federal services. It is obvious it will not meet the current and financial needs of the State Forest Division, including forest recreation. With many problems facing Oregon, how high will ODF rank when taxpayer funds are allocated by the legislature? I encourage you to take the time to balance GPV in this 70-year contract. This decision is too important to get wrong. I concur that ODF needs an HCP in these uncertain and litigious times, but the one proposed is not it. Thank you.
Thank you. Feel free to go back to seats and space. Up next, we'll have Karen Schmidlin, Bill Turner, Casey Kula, Heath Curtis. And our last set will be David Reed, Madeline Cohen, and Betsy Johnson. You three will be on deck. Karen, whenever you're ready to proceed. Oh, yes, make sure to turn that and bring it a little close in. Thanks.
Good morning, and thank you for hearing us this morning. My name is Karen Schmidlin. I'm from Banks, Oregon. I'm here to oppose the HCP. It's just too restrictive. My husband drives a log truck, and I work in Portland as a product developer. I represent thousands of ordinary Oregonians affected by forest plans. Natural resources are one of the biggest drivers of our economy in Oregon. The HCP will close down an enormous amount of one of our largest resources. When the harvest tax is reduced by this, it will need to tax families and businesses more. It seems crazy when Governor Kotek wants to build thousands of new homes in coming years and you want to close the forest logging. Shutting down the forest will drive up the cost of lumber. Now that more forest is unmanaged, the fires are thousands of acres and hard to control. So if you vote yes on this HCP, it will be your fault when thousands of acres of forest burn, sending millions of tons of carbon-filled smoke into our environment. It will be your fault when the land is damaged. It will be your fault when fish environments are destroyed, closing roads, burning homes, and creating health risks to thousands of people. It will be your fault when the animals die and lose their habitat due to fire. It will be your fault when home prices go even higher due to restricted supply and higher cost of materials. It will be your fault when many more once prosperous businesses close because of the abundant natural resources in Oregon will be off limits. It will be your fault when thousands more people leave Oregon and they'll take their money with them. It will be your fault when our economy tanks because of policies that do nothing to help the environment, the planet, or the climate. I do not understand how anyone in good conscience could do this much damage to our state, to our economy, and to our hardworking outdoor nature-loving people, to our children, and to our elderly folks. So I ask, do you have the courage to vote no and consider a more reasonable plan and save our state? Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Up next, Bill.
Good morning, State Forester Mukomoto and Board. My name is Bill Turner, and I'm the Oregon and Washington Timber Procurement Manager for Sierra Pacific Industries. Sierra Pacific is a vertically integrated, family-owned company. We're new to Oregon, but diving right in, I suppose. In managing our 2.4 million acres, we have several habitat conservation plans, incidental take permits, safe harbor agreements with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other agencies. We know these are complex and difficult things to do. We appreciate all the work that the department has done working through this difficult process. The U.S. Forest Service is reviewing their Northwest Forest Plan right now, and while it's not an HCP, it in effect acts like one. Passed in '94 was the Forest Service attempt to protect and enhance spotted owls, salmon, and other sensitive species. The Forest Service has since found that the act of species protection through preservation of large swaths of non-managed land has led to unchecked wildfires, insects, and disease outbreaks in their forests. It's not preserved the habitat, but instead relegated it to significant degradation. We can and we must do better. Oregon State forests and the species that rely on them, both humans and wildlife, can live and work and recreate and thrive on the same acres and within the same ecosystems. We don't need to succumb to the false narrative of either wildlife or jobs, either recreation or wood products. Active forest management is a critical tool for creating and protecting wildlife habitat and several stage conditions to allow a wide variety of species to flourish. We can also do this while growing healthy, sustainable forests and providing the most climate and community benefits. Sierra Pacific Industries would request that the Board of Forestry not adopt the current recommended alternative. Too much depends on this for wildlife, for forest health, and for the stability of our communities. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Up next, Casey.
Yeah, for the record, Casey Kula, Oregon Wild. So Chair, State Forester, members of the board, and staff who are with us today. I was reminded that this is not a game just a few moments ago, and you all know that. You don't need to be reminded of that. You spoke so eloquently to it, and I thank you for that, State Forester. This week, I was approached by a woman who said, hey, what's the status of the State Forest HCP? I started working on it in 1996. So as it happens, the board is prepared to make this momentous decision this week. So as my colleague, Michael Lang, said the other day, the State Forest HCP, it's not a recovery plan for struggling species. It's a prevent extinction plan. Another way to say that is your team's management over state forests, it'll comply with the Endangered Species Act, but it's not the plan for joy and abundance and restoration of these struggling species. And that is our responsibility. It's one step in the process. And I've asked you before to consider in the management plan specifically, connecting those HCAs from north to south, right? So that's up in Tillamook, Grand Ronde, Siuslaw, all the way up and down the coast, so that those species have places to go. ODFW has their priority wildlife connectivity areas, and your team will work with them if you say, hey, I need you to work with them. So lastly, you had a special board meeting to move forward the post-disturbance rules. And at that, I heard a lot of you say, we want to be the ones making the policy. We don't want to have other people bringing it to us and us stamping it. And it feels like this State Forest HCP that you should adopt, and I hope you will, is that you making your own policy decisions here together, right? Because you have to do it together. So with that, I just thank you for your service and good luck. You need it.
Up next, Heath.
Chuck Kelly, State Forester Mokomoto, members of the board. For the record, my name is Heath Curtis. As you know, I have the privilege of working for Hampton Lumber, a fourth generation family owned company located here in Oregon. Like most of our employees, I live in rural Oregon, in Silverton, just a few miles east of here, and my family relies on the many blessings that accrue to the productive management of Oregon's forests. Looking back, I was here in this room when then Governor Kitzhaber proposed the twin goals of increased financial viability and increased conservation. I believe both were possible then, and I continue to believe that today. Unfortunately, after many years of work since then, the department has badly missed the mark. The agency has brought to you a plan that further reduces timber harvest and drives the agency's finances permanently into the red, thereby decreasing financial viability. The plan also doubles down on the same hands-off management strategies that have led to catastrophic wildfire on federal lands, and as a result, ODF's HCP will ultimately decrease conservation. ODF did a poor job of negotiating the HCP, in part because ODF is already implementing elements of the HCP, including principally the large set-asides. Harvest has already fallen approximately 50 million board feet a year relative to the 10 and 20-year averages. And relative to the high we saw 5 years ago, harvest is down over 100 million board feet. This is a principal factor in driving log prices higher in Northwest Oregon, and because it is a global commodity, lumber pricing hasn't followed. As a consequence, mills are shuttering. At Hamptons, we closed banks in January. Interfor and Roseboro have recently made similar announcements. Should you accept the state forester's recommendation, I can assure you more mills will close. Please don't accept ODF's failure as an acceptable resolution. We stand ready to help you identify a more productive path forward, one that fully protects Oregon's sensitive species and drinking water, while simultaneously supporting thriving rural economies. And if I may, in my time remaining, because our company was specifically mentioned earlier, I thought I would highlight maybe a lawyerly point for you. At Willamina, when we filed our notice of construction for our rebuild, we filed a type 2 notice of construction. A requirement of a type 2 notice of construction is that you not increase emissions, and emissions are calculated using emissions factors relative to production. We are not expanding our mill in Willamina. Why would the Hampton family invest 9 digits in that sawmill in Willamina? Because as sawmills are collapsing around us, we want that community sawmill to be one of the ones that survives. I was taken back by the testimony earlier, and we hope you take the decision seriously.
Thank you. Last set will be David Reed, Madeline Cohen, and Betsy Johnson. If you can please proceed to the front table here, where my hand's at. Again, that's David Reed, Madeline Cohen, Betsy Johnson.
Members of the board, Chair Kelly, State Forester Mukomoto, I'm David Reed from the Astoria-Warrenton Area Chamber of Commerce, which represents 600 businesses from all sectors of our local economy. I say that at every public testimony because I want to drive the point home that this is not just a catastrophe for the forest product sector and county taxing districts, but for our entire economy. It's a crime that you or anybody else has that much power over us, but you do. Clatsop County has some of the best managed sustainable forest lands in the world, and we got there through collaboration and hard-won trust between industry and environmental concerns. Taking a unilateral 34% swipe at harvest levels breaches that trust and will undo 40+ years of hard work and cooperation. It's a good thing that the private forest accord negotiations happened before this trust was broken, because today, if you ask private landowners to come to the table, I doubt you'd be able to see them behind the phalanx of lawyers that they would bring with them. Nobody trusts this agency right now, but a single vote this morning could change that. Listen, I work for a board of directors. I serve on boards for nonprofit agencies. I know the wisdom of hiring good leaders and then providing them with resources, direction, and occasionally the cover that they need to do their work, and then trusting the results. But a board by its very nature sits above staff. From that higher vantage ground, they have a wider view of the landscape, and occasionally that vantage point points them to things that staff on the ground cannot see.
on those occasions, telling staff, good job, but we need you to go in a different direction is not only good governance, it's good leadership. So lead. Right-size this plan before irreparable harm is done to our families, communities, and even ODF itself.
Up next, Madeline.
Good morning, Chair Kelly, members of the board, State Forester Cal Mukamoto, and ODF staff. I think you have great leadership. Thank you for your continued work. It's nice to see you all again. For the record, my name is Madeline Cowan. I'm the grassroots organizer with Cascadia Wildlands. On behalf of the nearly 10,000 Oregonians who have signed petitions, testified before you, and written comments to you all, we thank you for your tireless work and commitment to this process. We know it's not easy. We support State Forester Mukamoto's recommendation to move forward with the Habitat Conservation Plan, and we urge the board to follow this recommendation. Moving forward, we're looking forward to working with the agency to secure stronger protections through the development of the Forest Management Plan. In making your decision, consider the many values, jobs, and opportunities that state forests hold when managed to increase habitat function. The ever-increasing boom in recreation, fishing, and foraging industries, as well as healthy forests that are best equipped to withstand climate-driven wildfires. Yes, the best available science tells us very clearly that older, more complex stands of forests are able to retain more moisture, store higher levels of carbon, and withstand fires, thus reducing risk to communities and potentially decreasing firefighting costs. Also, I understand that you've been threatened with some litigation. To be clear, I'm not a lawyer, but you should have received a letter from our legal director and others within the conservation community that detail how the threats in this potential litigation are completely empty. Contrary to the claims, the new forest management plan will dictate the agency standards, including suggested harvest levels, not the HCP. Please refer to this letter for more details and reach out if you have more questions. Again, I thank you for your tireless leadership and commitment to this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Betsy.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Betsy Johnson. I represented Tillamook and Clatsop counties, among other counties, in the legislature for more than 2 decades. During that time, I voted on some very consequential bills. Some of those votes I now deeply regret. They were based on political momentum and not on good policy. Some were dressed up as compromises, some predicated on outright untruths, and way too short on long-range analysis and contemplating what they meant in the future. They were passed on tight margins, indicating tremendous controversy. They had statewide hearings that were frankly shams. The decision had already been made. Despite Carla Chambers bravely filling your record with clear-eyed fiscal analysis, you're about to replicate the same mistakes. Your vote to accept the state forester's recommendation is a catastrophic miscalculation. Your heralded deal on the Elliott is coming unraveled after OSU finally figured out that the math didn't work without some harvest. That forest could have been sold, managed, be productive and revenue producing, but it wasn't. Politics and false promises screwed up that deal. This short session provided a fiscal life preserver, but how long will these political life rafts endure? Political band-aids on a gaping wound. Despite the department's zeal to invade the general fund, to hide bad management, poor execution, inscrutable policy, the general fund cannot sustain the hole that you're digging. Schools will close. And yes, Chair Kelly, your derisive remarks about the Jewel School were not appreciated. These are real people you're talking about. Roads will deteriorate. Economies in Northwest Oregon will suffer. The final insult is that a mere 4 people, those of you who anticipated to vote yes today, are running forest policy in the economy of Oregon. No voters, no credible public process. Oregonians will remember you, and not favorably.
Okay, testimony providers, we appreciate your participation in today's board meeting. Okay. So thank you all, and at this point, we will pass it back to State Forester Mukomoto for his recommendation. I think it'd be good for you to read at this point.
My name is Cal Mukomoto. I'm State Forester for Oregon. My recommendation to the department is to take actions necessary to finalize the Western Oregon State Forest Habitat Conservation Plan as drafted and worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries to complete the HCP and obtain the associated incidental take permits. Completion of the HCP will include the minor changes made since the release of the public draft in March 2021. Other minor changes needed to obtain the incidental take permits. It will not include significant changes to the conservation actions as currently drafted. And two, model management outcomes that the board can use to discuss trade-offs and inform the setting of performance measure targets to be used to direct initial implementation of the FMP that relies upon the HCP for ESA compliance.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I want to be able to provide opportunity for each board member to be able to explain their thoughts around this issue. Plenty of time for that and plenty of time for board discussion. And my understanding is that we may have one or two alternative motions. And so I think it would be great for those of you who are considering making a motion to do that first. And if we have a motion that is made and seconded, the board can vote on those. And then I think we will once we have dealt with those motions, and at that point, then look at State Forester's recommendation. So, opening it up to any of you. Brenda, I saw you first.
Well, I'm not sure what you're expecting, Jim. Are you looking for comments from each of us, or are you looking for a motion from someone?
Well, I want to have plenty of time for everybody to have comments who wants to make them. But I do think that we'll try to manage this as best we can. But if we do have alternative motions, we want to consider those early in this process.
Board members and State Forester and Board Chair, sorry to interrupt, but we're having a hard time hearing you online. Could everybody just bring their microphones about 6 inches from them?
Okay.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Chair Kelly, I would really value listening to the comments before you ask us to vote on motions. Is that possible?
Sure.
And
Sure.
if so, I'd be happy.
I'm not trying to
Okay. I would really
find a
appreciate.
structure here. But
Yeah, I would really appreciate that, and
do you want to start?
I'd be happy to start.
Great.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everybody that we have listened to for the last year and a half, 2 years. I've lost track of how much time we've been listening to testimony. On a lighter note, the OSU women play at noon today. And so maybe we can all watch some good basketball after this discussion. I'm looking forward to that. A Board of Forestry responsibility states that all board members must work for the public, for the benefit of the public first. We are to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. Over 800 people have testified on this HCP, hundreds and hundreds of emails and letters. Every Oregon Republican in the legislature sent us a letter opposing the HCP this week. New lawsuits New lawsuit threats have been received this week. County commissioners, industry, and environmentalists are all upset. Beyond the HCP, there is a massive debate and disagreement with how Oregon forests should be managed going forward. I believe the real debate we're having is over active versus passive management. Milton Friedman, a great economist, quotes, "One of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results." What are the results of passive management in Oregon the past 40 years, as almost 70% of our forest acres have gone unmanaged? Are we protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the general public? This 70% is among the highest in the world. The EU set aside is at 25%. Canada is at 30%. I think we owe it to step back and take a look at these results. This week, we have record lawsuits against our public utilities in Oregon from past wildfire. Millions and millions in damages will be paid out. These damages will be spread out and covered by ratepayer increases. Pacific Core will have had a 51% rate increase in 3 years, actual and proposed. This hurts all Oregonians, and much of this is directly attributed to wildfire. Capital investment in forest products infrastructure is growing faster outside of Oregon. Capital investment in utilities in Oregon is highly at risk. High-tech chip investment, food processing, or any other manufacturing needs competitive power. With 50% power rate increases in 3 years, we are not competitive. Attracting capital to Oregon is at risk. Commercial and property insurance rates are skyrocketing in Oregon. We have a 43% increases. We've seen 43% increases on commercial insurances. Wildfire risk drives up those costs to Oregonians and to business. Sisters in Camp Sherman sent out this flyer: affordable home and insurance coverage not available in Central Oregon, directly attributed to wildfire. The true cost of wildfire in the Western U.S. Forest Service shows that when all costs are considered, the ratio is $153 to $1 total cost to suppression costs. Our 6-year average gross fire cost to ODF is $94.5 million. You do the math. ODF has $152 million in accounts receivable and left to invoice, and a $50 million loan, all driven by wildfire costs. These 3 numbers alone are over half our budget. ODF is experiencing extremely large employee turnover at the highest levels: executive team, HR, audit, safety, finance. ODF is not financially sound from a cash flow perspective. A study by the Journal of Environmental Pollution showed that the 2020 wildfire season in California emitted more greenhouse gases than 18 years of carbon reduction efforts in that state. Climate Wire published a new study noting the record-breaking fires released 2x the amount of emissions that California cut between 2003 and 2019. 38 scientists came together, an excellent collaboration in the scientific community, and they told us the northern spotted owl will go extinct if we do not remove and control the barred owl. They also said the 2020 wildfires burned significant nesting and roosting forest cover for the northern spotted owl, and that we must control these wildfires. Oregon's Wildfire Council said Oregon must mitigate and reduce fuels on 5.4 million acres at an estimated cost of $4 billion. Those estimates on acres have grown. Our mitigations are not at all scalable to date. Oregon has burned rural communities: Gates, Detroit, Phoenix, Talent, Blue River, McKinsey, and more. The 2020 Labor Day wildfires burned more than 1.2 million acres of land, destroyed 5,000 plus homes and businesses. Oregon has burned 7.8 million acres in 10 years in wildland fires. We only have 29.5 million acres of forest lands and 62 million total acres. 75% of acres burned are on public lands. ODF managed state lands have lost 13.5 million in 2 years and projecting to lose 21.2 million actual loss between 22 and 24. State forest lands have gone from a positive net income of 37.7 million to negative 21.2 million net income, a $60 million swing in 10 years. This is a $6 billion asset of some of the most productive timberland in the world now losing money. In 40 years of records set aside, our forest health is diminished. Poor health, more disease, more insect, and we didn't save the northern spotted owl. If harvest levels drop to 167 million board feet, this is an 88 million biennial reduction to ODF and the trust counties relative to the 10 and 20-year average harvest. Over 70 years, this is $3.08 billion coming out of those 15 trust counties and ODF without interest. This comes from county programs and ODF, the very agency we need financially healthy to fight these fires. This 88 million does not include the multiplier effect of the total economic activities and losses in these rural communities. If we look to Oregon taxpayers to pay for all of this, are Oregonians better off? There is no financial plan for this HCP. A future negotiation is not a budget plan, a contract, or a commitment. Solutions. There is wide agreement we need an HCP. We can push back on the services, as Liz will share with you, Liz Apoa. And she has spent her career doing this, and I really encourage us to listen carefully to what she has to say. We can balance this with an optimization model. It is time to pause before we do massive damage to ODF and the trust counties and provide more of the same failed forest policy for Oregonians. We can negotiate a minimum harvest volume into this HCP at 225 million board feet, exactly where this process started. It is time to do better for the people of Oregon on forest policy. I do not support this HCP as proposed. Governor, give us an opportunity for middle ground. This is a 70-year commitment at a very, very high price tag. There is a better roadmap and solution. This HCP is no greater than take avoidance. If we do nothing, we are in the same place. There is middle ground. Let's find it and do better for all of Oregon. This is very personal for me. I grew up in Sherman County, and I'm fourth generation. My family's been ranching 136 years up there. In one afternoon, we watched in the middle of harvest a major fire come off the BLM, completely due to lack of control of burnable fuels. Almost 82,000 acres in 2.5 days was scorched. And we lost a farmer in that fire. At that point, I asked the governor to go on to her wildfire council, as we know we have to deal with these burnable fuels in Oregon. Next week, I'm headed to the largest natural food show in the world. I'm an organic farmer, first farm in the US to be certified as sustainable. We will have 85,000 people a day come by our booth. Trust me, nobody wants smoke tainted wine or baby food. I supply the biggest baby food companies in the world. We all want the same thing, cleanest food. We want clean water. We want a clean environment. But there's different solutions of how we get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Board members, who would like to go next? Liz, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Kelly. And this is me being optimistic. I'm going to read a little bit just because I have been up the last few nights. My mind won't let me stop. And so I'll get up and I'll scribble something down and I'll reread. And I finally printed it off today. So excuse me as I read it, because I don't do that as respect to the audience. I want to go back about a month ago. we received before one of our meetings, and I was driving up from Medford, Oregon, a letter trying to explain what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife process was doing when we were looking at a number of graphs. And I was so confused, even as a wildlife biologist, that ODF Mike offered to contact the services and let us have a conversation with them. So we did, and so that was early February, and we were able to speak with the new Oregon State Supervisor and the state wildlife biologist, who generously spent time with over several meetings with us to clarify aspects and roles within the HCP and its processes. And in those meetings, they spoke to the lengthy timeline to analyze a separate alternative within the range and how long it would take. I heard that analysis, analyze another alternative within the range, would take at least an entire 4 years, as it was shared by the biologist. And I was stunned by this lengthy time frame. My understanding and experience of planning, wildlife management, and capacity issue solving for projects doesn't take me there. This has led to some to speculate that therefore, there is no clear path forward except to keep with the existing option, given the current capacity issues inferred by the service. However, an advantage of the state office is that they really are just the floor, and there are many levels of support above them at the regional office and certainly at the national office in DC. So there is help to be gotten, but in addition to that leadership support from the regional directors and national directors, the services were given a tested and proven gift by Congress, a capacity and skills expanding tool through the 2018 Consolidated Appropriations Act, named Experience Services Program, called ESP. Its objective is to expand and complete conservation work by immediately securing highly skilled and experienced enrollees for the work. It began over 15 years ago with the initial version of this capacity tool called Ag Conservation Experience Service, or ACES, when it was authorized in the 2008 Farm Bill for NRCS. And due to its success and use, ACES was expanded in 2014 to include the Forest Service with the passage of the Farm Bill of 2014. Senators Wyden and Merkley voted for the 2014 Farm Bill and Wyden again on the 2018 Consolidated Appropriations Bill to support that. Both ACES and ESP can immediately access NEPA skills and were created exactly to address the stated services HCP capacity and timeline challenge. It is a proven path forward. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service version of ESP is highly flexible and innovative and can immediately bring specialized skills such as scientists, biologists, planners, analysts, GIS, and numerous other skills, many from retired federal workers, to fill short-term, long-term, part-time, and full-time needs. Just within the ACES program, hundreds of enrollees have already participated at the national office in DC, the Pacific Southwest Research Station, Forest Products, and offices across 17 states. The DOI's, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, ESP program enrollees have already provided 21.5 million hours of skills to federal agencies, including EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, and BLM, on highly complex projects, some involving multi-state boundaries. And I have a number of retired colleagues that are part of some of the more complex projects already in motion. It might be speculated, I think erroneously, that even with ESP and this addition of highly skilled workers contributing to the process, the HCP timelines would not be altered. To me, this appears to be non sequitur and defies decades of my own experience of completing complex NEPA and NFA documents. During my career, I've had hands-on planning experience and decision-making responsibilities under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and NFMA. I know that the critical paths can be shortened and be made more efficient with the appropriate addition of highly skilled workers. Over 3 decades, I have made complex decisions on a wide variety of NEPA projects dealing with forest to aquatic to land exchanges, just across the board. And I'll mention a few of those decisions now. In New Mexico, on a very abbreviated timeline, I planned and executed the NEPA decision for the creation of the Magdalena Ridge Observatory by rapidly accessing higher-level region-wide skills for planning, tribal liaison, and archaeology for an important mountaintop ecosystem sacred to multiple pueblos. Additionally, in this process, I requested national office expertise to assist with partnership collaboration with our partners on this project, Cambridge University, the nation's Naval Research Lab, and Air Force Research Lab. The planned observatory would exceed Hubble's Space Telescope resolution by 100 times. And when complete, it will be one of the largest Earth-based optical telescopes. Also, among the many objectives is the exploration of exoplanets. I believe due to this upfront, consequential collaboration, consultation, and inclusion across multiple parties, we stuck with it. The 1,000-acre mountaintop complex was not administratively challenged. I'm taking a sip of water here. Can I do what? Lean into, okay. How's that, Megan? Thank you. In North Carolina, just another example, I sought to allow for the first time limited non-motorized boating access on the wild and scenic Chattooga River and its Blue Ribbon waters, which were previously only accessible by in-stream anglers. American Whitewater challenged the NEPA plan and decision, arguing boating access was not enough, and Forest Watch also intervened and then subsequently argued that boating access was excessive. Forest and regional early and robust engagement of communities of place and communities of interest over several years, yes, several years, were key to a complex final decision. Collaboration on many social issues, evaluation of seasonal water flows, multiple years of intensive actual use surveys led to finally threading the decision needle, balancing use among the multiple parties. And those parties stayed with us the entire time. Judge Harris in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the decision of the lower court and stated that the well-rounded NEPA document and the final decision carefully balance wide-ranging issues regarding the soundness of the plan and final decision. And then lastly, I had a NEPA decision in Louisiana, the Sportsman's Paradise, and I in part due to serious safety issues, shooting near misses, and angry hunter confrontation with law enforcement, proposed a ban on historical deer dog hunting in the national forest. It was appealed, and after the administrative appeal decision, I did go back and reissued the NEPA plan and decision. The NEPA plan and decision was twice litigated in Louisiana by the Louisiana sportsman. Judge Dedrill, known as a lawyer's lawyer, and supported across aisle just so strongly, dismissed the initial lawsuit in 2012. The Louisiana sportsmen and then hunters brought a second lawsuit in 2017 to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where Judge Drill ruled in a summary judgment based on that administrative record. Judge Dedrill twice affirmed the NEPA plan and decision in 2012 and then again in 2018 when he decided to hear the second challenge, explaining that he was inclined to do so because the case was so interesting and unusual. Finally, in that second 2018 lawsuit, Judge Drell dismissed the case with prejudice, reaffirming the soundness of the administration record and decision. A commonality in all these cases and decision was a robust and purposeful and consequential engagement of all those affected in striving for a balanced decision that would stand the test of legal challenges. And I took the time to talk about that because there was, when I first got on the board, I've only been on a little over 2 years, early on there was a comment, we had a presentation by the PFA group, and there's been many bumps in the road, a lot of hard work. Some of the folks in this room have been part of that long negotiation. And I think a board member said, why don't we do this with all our decisions, which would, really, be too difficult to do. But looking at that decision, one of the things that I know that I had heard is that there was so much rigor and robust discussion between all parties, everyone in, eyes open. And every time that there was an issue, parties went back to the table, did their analysis, invested a lot of money to come back and say, okay, this is how far we can go. This is what would work for us. So there was always rigorous information in which to base that. And I think we heard that when we had that U.S. Fish and Wildlife discussion, what I saw is that there was peeks into that black box. And in leadership, you always have best intention for your employees on what they were trying to do. And I reflect back, and I think the design was wrong for what we wanted for those twin goals. And I just go back to that PFA, and I think about that. So the commonality in these cases was robust, purposeful, and consequential engagement from the beginning that would withstand legal challenges. One can make mistakes when you hurry. Healthy leadership is incorporating learning from mistakes and then continuing on. In the words of basketball coach John Wooden, be quick, don't hurry.
Thank you. Joe.
So, Mr. Chair, I got a process question here. After my remarks, I'd like to make a motion. I'm certainly, I'm not closing it out, but I just want to point that out.
Okay, if everybody's comfortable, why don't we hear from other board members first then? So, you want to go there?
Thanks, Jim. I just have a few remarks, and I just want to provide a basis for my decision on this topic, and it comes from my experience. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are less than 50 years of age? So I began my research on wildlife habitat relationships in forests before you were born. I started working in research as a forest scientist and a wildlife scientist at universities 45 years ago. So I've been at this for a while. And I've worked in different forests across this country, and I've worked in different forests around the world. So I understand pretty well wildlife habitat relationships in forests, and most of the work that I've done has been in managed forests, not old growth, managed forests. I spent over 20 years in Oregon as a research scientist. And I've worked on wildlife habitat relationships at stand level, landscape level, and regional level. And I've worked with students here at Oregon State University, and then students at other universities as well, on many species, including 4 species which will be covered under this HCP should an ITP be released. And we've contributed to the body of knowledge that is used to develop things like this HCP. And I also use that information when I serve as a consultant working with forest managers on how to recover and grow and create habitat for some of these species. So I am not opposed to managing forests. I spent my career in management. So I know a little bit about these species, and when I began serving on this board 5.5 years ago and learning more about state forest management, the rotation ages that are used, the rate of harvest, and the distribution of harvest, it was clear to me at that time that forest management on state forests was inconsistent with providing habitat for some of these species. They were not going to persist on these landscapes if we continued to do what we're doing. And it became clear to me that we either needed an HCP or a safe harbor agreement in some cases perhaps, but take avoidance was not likely to be a long-term strategy for. So I have been pretty invested in seeing an HCP be developed, but it has to be one that uses science. It has to be one that uses some of the information that we've developed over the last 45 or 50 years, including information that was developed last year, recent information. And I think this HCP proposal that has been produced does a pretty good job of that. It identifies core areas, it identifies connectivity among those core areas, it provides the habitat area and connectivity that would be likely to allow these species to persist. And this is the goal here, is to allow the species to persist, not to grow the populations, not to expand the populations, not to recover populations, but simply allow these species to persist on these state forests, while at the same time balancing other values: timber, recreation, aesthetics, water quality, variety of other things. And so I feel like science was used as the basis for this HCP in order to allow these species to persist. And my feeling is that there may be other approaches, but this is a good one. And it's one that we should, or at least I will support. So with that, I think that it's a path forward for the agency to allow the species to persist and avoid violation of the Endangered Species Act.
Thank you, Brenda. Ben Neumeling.
Thank you, Chair. I've been intimately involved in these state forests, thinking about these state forests for much of the last decade, and especially the last 3 years that I've been on this board, and the area that I've felt like I've tried to focus on the most, because I felt like it's the most important issue that's coming in front of the board in my tenure here. And I want to thank everybody for being here today, and for all the comments and testimony. It's heartfelt, and it's real, and there are real and hard consequences of these actions, and I see that. And I live in a rural area. I've worked in the timber industry my whole life, and it's a really important industry, and it's the heart and lifeblood of our state. And it's one I'm very, very proud of. I'm interested in finding the best deal possible for these forests, for the state of Oregon, for all the people who live and work in this state. And I've been searching for that compromise, that middle path, that sweet spot, the Goldilocks, whatever you want to call it, for years. And all I can do is make the best judgments that I can based on what I know. And this isn't ideological, this isn't political, it's pragmatic. It's what can we do that meets these twin benefits? We keep talking about twin goals. I'd like to think that it's much more than just two. There's a lot of different things we want from these forests. What's the best path forward? And I'm not afraid of time. Taking more time to get this right, that's not a concern for me. If we need to take more time to get it right, let's do that. The problem is, I don't think more time will get us a better scenario. And that's hard for me to say, because I wish at the bottom of my heart there was a better scenario. But I don't think the risk is worth it. I am deeply, deeply concerned that taking more time to try to find a better path forward is going to set us backwards. And we'll end up with something less desirable than where we are right now. And that's, I hesitate to call that simple, but that's the simple truth of where I am at on this. And I don't see a better path. And a lot of people have told me that there is a better path, that we can take the time to get it better. And I wish from the bottom of my heart that was true, but I don't see that path. But that doesn't mean we don't have a lot of work to do ahead of us. And I see a huge amount of potential with the FMP work, the Forest Management Plan work in front of us. And it's going to take all of us, our county partners, the board, staff, Mike, you and your staff, to expand our thinking of what's possible with that FMP, to broaden our assumptions and our parameters of what is possible for these forests, these acres in this forest, and what those outcomes could look like. Because I think there is a path forward that keeps a lot of jobs in these forests, and it'll be different than what it has been. But I think there is a path forwards on these acres that isn't perfect, but I think is a much better outcome than the fears that I've heard today. And I'm committed to working on that in the time that I continue to be on the board, to try to find a better outcome than we can currently imagine with that forest management plan. So I didn't have a lot of written remarks. These are just notes that I've jotted down over the last couple of weeks as I've been, like Liz, been up at night thinking about this a lot, because I see how important this is. And thank you.
Thank you. Sandra, your turn.
Thanks, Chair. And thank you to my fellow board members. I have the privilege of, I think, delivering some later remarks as usual, and you guys, as always, are making fantastic points. And again, I'm just happy to be serving with you all right now and going into this decision. And again, thank you to everyone who's in the room today and for all of their participation really over the years, and in some cases decades, on this issue. And I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate and acknowledge the folks that have made comments to us over the years and aren't in this room, and frankly have never been in this room. I think there's a lot of folks that are deeply intimidated to be here and in this space, but they have deeply held opinions about the forests and what those mean to them as well. And as a board, we are trying to capture all of that and understand the public interest in forests on the bigger picture level, and that is our job. And so I just want those folks to know that we read those comments, we hear your concerns as well. And you know, what we have heard from that is that, again, most Oregonians deeply care about their forests for many reasons. It's for the clean water, it's for fish and wildlife, many which are iconic Oregon species, and those are imperiled. And folks have an interest, right, in having those species be around into the future for their kids and their grandkids. And it's for livelihoods. I mean, it's for so many things. And it's what makes this a really challenging point that we're at, because as a board, and I think one of the representatives said this, you know, we're supposed to move forward with common sense. And I know you won't all agree with where our common sense has led us, but that's what we're trying to do, trying to make a decision, and in some cases to do it without passion or prejudice. I think that comes up in the context of law, right? That's what we're trying to do. And I think Ben said this really well, like where I've ended up landing is, you know, common sense says that we should be putting forward a pathway that is consistent with the law. Like, number one, right, we have to be consistent with legal requirements. And it's not the most compelling or emotional way to say that, but it's true. And what this plan does do is it gives you that over 70 years. And we know we're in a deeply uncertain time. you're going to see additional species listed. You're going to see additional changes happen in that landscape. And what doesn't get said as much is that the commitments that are in that HCP, that's it. That's it for species. If you don't have a plan in there, like there's unplanned things, well, too bad. You know, you don't go to the legislature and ask for more habitat for species. So there is a risk there too. But what the folks in this room, what the staff has been doing over, all of these years is coming up with these different technical experts and feedback and best available information to try to find the best package that we think will get us that legal standard in a balanced way. And I think we do everybody a disservice to suggest that there are other alternatives available that would meet ESA. In particular, really increase the level of harvest. I don't think that's possible either. And like Ben, I mean, we wish there was a pathway, but I don't know that one exists for ESA compliance. That said, I think this board is deeply committed to looking at the other more flexible options. I think the FMP is one of those. We've been encouraged that there's been conversations at the governor's level about the revenue issues. And again, I know that's not going to be a 100% holistic solution, but we're encouraged that those are happening and on a meaningful level. And I think folks are committed to that moving forward. And I'll just say in general, you can't be a human and not be deeply impacted by the testimony that we've heard from the communities, from the schools. Like, yeah, I want every child in Oregon deserves a good education and good extracurriculars. But I am concerned about the connection of our natural resources and extraction to those services. Like, we do need more reliable, durable solutions for education funding. And that's a whole nother issue that we're not going to be able to address today. But I just want you all to know that, yeah, we are hurt by that. We really are. And the decisions that are made today have to be made at this higher level and consistent with the information that we have in front of us and intended to address legal requirements. And we will do everything else in our power. At least I am committed, and I know our board is, that other options that are available that are more flexible, and we want to explore what might be possible there. And in particular, I think the most pressing one will be the FMP, or the most upcoming one. So that is where I am at. And again, I really appreciate everything I've heard from my fellow board members, and yes, move forward.
Thank you, Chandra. I'll go next, but first I thought, Mike Wilson, I don't think we gave you an opportunity after public testimony to see if, or any of this, whether you have anything that you'd like to mention or talk about in front of the board or not. I'll give you a minute before I go here.
Chair Kelly, members of the board, State Forester Makamoto, thank you. My name is Mike Wilson. I serve as the State Forest Division Chief. I appreciate everything I've heard here today, and this is not an easy solution, and I really appreciate each and every one of you providing your comments on this and really doing your soul searching. A couple of things that I would say on this that are important for folks to know. We do need an HCP. Take avoidance will not work for us. It's arguable how well it's worked for us in the past. I would also like to highlight one thing that's always happened here with the board. Our original forest management plan in 2001 had a landscape design of 40 to 60% complex structure, layered and older forest structure, not old growth, older forest structure, with active management and a designated landscape design that's put together in the implementation plans. In 2010, we revised the plan, the board revised the plan to drop that to 30 to 50%. On all districts except for Tillamook, the planning, the DFC that was already designated went down closer to 30%. The reason was volume. This is always the challenge. Now, I'm going to say, personally, I like former Governor John Kitzhaber. But I will tell you, and I'm not the first one to say this, twin goals was really not a good setup. You're gonna have to move one to have the other. That's just the nature of it. That said, we have an HCP in front of us. We've done a lot of work with the services to get there. Other state agencies were involved. We also had a very public process around it. We had numerous public meetings. We had numerous individual stakeholder group meetings at their request. We had tremendous facilitation of the process. I appreciate that not everybody was at the table who wanted to be. Some of that was certainly not the department's decision. If we move forward with this, one of the things that I want everybody to know is that I don't view this as the end. This is a beginning. I believe firmly that this plan, with all the work that we have done, will result in incidental take permits without any further conservation measures being added. Okay? I'm not speaking for the services, and they're not going to say that. They're not going to be pre-decisional. But by God, after all this time, if we don't end up there, I will be shocked, and I would be the first one to say, wait a minute. Okay? That said, assuming incidental take permits from this HCP, that is not the end. We continually do adaptive management under the current conservation measures as drafted, but then also there is an amendment process if at some point this becomes untenable. I'm fully committed to all of that work moving forward. But what would really be helpful for our business is to have the initial coverage of those incidental take permits. Now, I agree, financially, things are always difficult for us. I do wish that we had fixed that problem 20 years ago, but we didn't. And here we are today. Still needs to be fixed. And even if we didn't have an HCP, if we continued to undertake avoidance, it would still need to be fixed. That's just really important for everybody to understand. That said, I'd like to set some expectations around harvest. The yield tables that we are currently working with, the yield tables that produce the modeled outcomes that were presented in December, are the best that we have ever had. We might have had them sooner had we not made divestments, key divestments, in inventory during the Great Recession. We did. We are trying to rebuild that inventory. That provided us a lot of valuable insights. I want everybody to keep in mind when they look at past harvest levels, and I'm not speaking of actual harvest levels, which vary for a variety of reasons. We always overrun, not on every sale, but typically we 10% overrun a year is a reasonable figure from what's sold and appraised and sold versus what arrives at the mill and gets scaled. That's why we sell on a recovery basis. So IPs that have been generated previously that put certain harvest objectives there, those were based on yield tables that were overly optimistic, just like the yield tables that were used in the early part of this process. We did make calibrations along the way, but we didn't have the full set of data necessary to make all the calibrations. So what I'm trying to say is, even under our current plan, undertake avoidance with no additional encumbrances, I fully expect that our harvest levels would decline. I can't tell you how much. So there's that. Again, I really appreciate all of this. If anybody has specific questions, that's why I'm sitting here. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Kelly.
Any questions for Mike? Okay, not hearing any. Okay. Well, first, I want to remind everyone once again that we are here because of the Endangered Species Act, not for any other reason. And like it or not, it is the law of the land. We have heard a tremendous amount of testimony about how this HCP will negatively affect communities and jobs, and a tremendous amount of testimony about why an HCP is the best way to meet the ESA and do right by endangered species. We have listened. You know, I'll quibble with some of the numbers and all of this, but people on both sides of this have had totally legitimate points over and over. And I really appreciate everyone being here and having been here. But our job also means that we have to look at the big picture. We're the Oregon Board of Forestry. We're supposed to look at the whole state. While many think that we should maintain current levels of harvest in our state forests or even increase them, others think we should scale way back. But here's how I see the big picture and how I have formed my opinion and my vote today. The level of total harvest in Oregon forests has stayed fairly steady for decades. But what did happen now decades ago is that harvest on federal lands was severely limited, starting with the spotted owl, as we all know. That means that federal forests, representing 60% of Oregon's forests, today provides only 12% of the total harvest. With so little harvest in federal forests, that has created a lot of pressure for more harvest on private land and on Oregon state forests. So while representing just 3% of Oregon's forests, these state forest lands produce 10% of the harvest. Everybody understands that. 3% of our forests produce 10% of the harvest. And that's out of balance. And the fact that those state forests, the ones primarily in Northwest Oregon and the Coast Range, are surrounded by private forests that are, for the most part, fairly intensively managed. That's why we've had the Coho lawsuit and our other issues. That's why we're here today. And at the end of the day, I'm afraid, you know, most Oregonians don't want our state forest to be managed like commercial tree farm. And it doesn't align with greatest permanent value. I am not completely happy with this version of the HCP. Far from it. However, the risk versus reward scenario of essentially starting over with potentially 3 more years of delay makes no sense. Risking more listings and lawsuits and the distinct possibility of a federal judge taking over management of our state forests, all in the hope that we could get a relatively small amount of additional harvest, is not worth it. Going ahead with this HCP is actually our only way to guarantee we have a future for our state forests, is that does not shut them down like what happened in our federal forests. All that said, knowing that this will cause real and significant economic impacts for some businesses and communities, I can only take this vote knowing that the governors and others are committed to a process that aims to keep the affected trust-land counties and community financially whole. I will continue to be committed to that effort. And we have some time to make some adjustments. Projected harvest volumes for the next 3 years are quite healthy. This year, 2024, is estimated at 254,680 million board feet. 2025 is estimated at 234,572, and 2026 is projected to be 237,741. So I encourage all of you to keep focused on the big picture. But in the big picture of Oregon forests, despite what we have heard, the sky is not falling, far from it. What should be clear is that we need more balanced management of all our forests in Oregon. And that does include more active and sustainable management in many of our overstocked federal forests. That is how we can best help foster a future with healthy forests, fewer destructive fires, good jobs in the woods, and keep mills open and small communities economically viable. So depending who you listen to, ODF has been pursuing an HCP on and off for 30 years. Some say 1994, some say 1996. I believe it is time we send a clear message that this board intends to get this over the finish line and not be revisiting this topic.
Thanks, Jim. Joe Justice for the record. Appreciate all the comments from my fellow board members. This has been quite a journey. 5.5 years. It seems like I've been talking about this since we first got on the board. And I'm going to do what I do. I've reflected a lot on that journey, and my comments are really about that and related to some of my frustrations about that, the process that we've gone through. And I want to offer a different alternative. So, Jim, this decision is about compliance with the Endangered Species Act. And HCP is just one way to comply with the ESA. Another way is to comply as take avoidance. Our decision today is whether this HCP is a better way to comply than take avoidance. I need to repeat that. Our choice today is proceed with this HCP, instructing ODF to try to improve this HCP, or staying with take avoidance. And we must make that decision using the most recent facts, and those facts have changed from years ago when I was in this process 5.5 years ago. You know, the twin goals of financial viability increasing conservation outcomes were the two reasons this department and board pursued this HCP. The twin goals were in direct alignment, I believe, with achieving greatest permanent value, which is our statutory obligation. As a board member, you should ask yourself this question: does this HCP achieve these two twin goals? If this HCP doesn't achieve these goals, then is the decision to accept this HCP in alignment with greatest permanent value? Let me dive a little deeper into those two questions and my concerns over this process and information. The goal to increase conservation outcomes. I have repeatedly asked questions about how habitat conservation areas and habitat commitments were agreed to. The answers, frankly, have been less than satisfactory. Years ago, when I first got on this board, Liz Dent described a selection of HCAs as a negotiation where they were selecting areas of important habitat and species occurrence that ideally would have lower effect on harvest rates, i.e., selecting non-operable areas. Sounded good to me. She suggested ODF negotiate strongly to reduce the impact to harvesting. When I ask the same question today, I get a different answer. Current and past species occurrence along with habitat connectivity is the answer I get. I guess the bottom line is, are we increasing conservation outcomes? And why is harvest no longer a metric? The conclusion I must come to is ODF staff never completely understood how this negotiation would affect harvest levels. They were disadvantaged negotiating blindly, and resulting harvest rates are simply a secondary outcome of these habitat negotiations. Let me talk about the goal of achieving financial viability. Financial viability is directly correlated to harvest volume. It is the only financial lever we have on state forests to generate significant revenue. This HCP will reduce harvest volume somewhere, and these numbers you hear a lot, between 40 and 90 million board feet annually, as compared to current harvest levels over time. How does that compare to outcomes of take avoidance? The last analysis that we looked at take avoidance was in 2020's comparative analysis. And I just want to remind everybody, this analysis depicted average harvest of the HCP at 225 million board feet, and take avoidance resulting in an average harvest of 175 to 212. Since that time, obviously ODS has further refined their harvest estimates, as Mike has talked about, and reduced the HCP harvest estimates to somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 to 180 million board feet. I need to repeat that. The numbers have changed along the way. That's one of my biggest frustrations as a board member. And we must take that into account today. Basing the goal of achieving financial viability on volume, which is our only financial lever, we must conclude that this HCP does not achieve harvest significantly different than take avoidance. It's obvious. Look at the numbers. I will point out, I've asked staff for the latest thoughts and information on take avoidance because, things change, to be brought before this board. They've not done that. And I don't believe, frankly, it's a priority for them. I will also point out that in the comparative analysis, the retrieval is assumed to be uplisted. As you know, this didn't happen. This is yet another example of uncertainty of take avoidance. We wrongly assume uncertainty will always have negative consequences. Frankly, with the changing numbers we have been provided on this HCP, we have an entirely different kind of uncertainty. One thing I am certain of is that this HCP does not achieve the goal of financial viability. So here we are, faced with a decision that will impact the lives of Oregonians for the next 70 years. The direct impacts the trust counties, ODS staff, the forest products workers, and indirect impacts to rural communities all around our state. Is this the right HCP? It's obvious to me that it's not. To accept this HCP, we're accepting a financial future that is likely no better than take avoidance. An HCP is supposed to be a win-win. Stakeholders and Oregonians saw this mutual benefit is possible with private forest accord. Why can't we do it here? Don't we owe it to Oregonians to keep going until we get there? We must do better for the counties, the department, and all of us Oregonians. I understand that setting forest policy isn't perfect, and compromise is part of the process. I want to find a way to support an HCP, I really do, because I believe the idea of an HCP and how it is possible to achieve a win-win. I stated at the start of my comments that we have a choice between three options: take avoidance, this HCP, or an improved HCP. It does not matter if it adds years. We must get this right for the next 70. To me, the only responsible choice among these three is to approve an HCP based on numbers as we understand them today. We cannot lead forests into the future using inaccurate numbers from the past. We must go back to the services and negotiate this HCP to achieve a minimum harvest level that the comparative analysis described. If we don't try and do it at least that, we are not even attempting to, in my opinion, to achieve greatest permanent value, which is our statutory obligation. So, Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to offer a motion. It's a little bit long. I apologize for that, and I can give you a copy of it. So, I would like to move that the Board of Forestry direct the Oregon Department of Forestry staff to engage with the board, the trust land counties, and the Federal Wildlife Services with the objective of modifying this HCP in a manner that meets the Endangered Species Act Section 10 issuance criteria while ensuring a projected annual harvest level of at least 225 million board feet.
Okay, we have a motion on the table, and we have a second. If we do, we'll have an opportunity for discussion.
Liz seconds.
Okay, Liz Akpawa has seconded. Comments? Discussion? Brenda?
Yeah, I just want to reflect back on what Mike said just a few minutes ago. And that is that in your analysis, that did not seem possible. You could achieve those harvest levels and still provide the protection needed to receive an ITP. And that, I mean, based upon my experience, that would be my conclusion as well. But did I understand that correctly?
Yes, more or less. So the whatever acreage reduction in HCA's or other method of getting there, I do, not knowing exactly what that would be, it's a little difficult to say if it would still meet the services expectations for an ITP. I mean, they haven't even done their biological opinion yet on this one. They're waiting. But the other thing is the process to date. We've gone through a lot of process and dispensed with a lot of concerns along the way as that goes. And so even though they can't be pre-decisional, they know where they're at. I can't speak for them as to how they would feel about changes that would achieve that level of volume, and it would depend on what that level of volume would require.
Okay, in that case, I will reread the motion. We have a motion from Joe Justice, seconded by Liz Akpawa, and it reads, "The Board of Forestry directs the Oregon Department of Forestry staff to engage with the board, the trust land counties, and the Federal Wildlife Services with the objective of modifying the HCP in a manner that meets the Endangered Species Act, Section 10 issuance criteria while ensuring a projected average annual harvest of at least 225 million board feet." Okay, we'll poll the board. So prepare yourself for a vote on that motion. Liz Agpawa,
Chair Kelly, I vote yes. Aye.
Carla Chambers,
Aye.
Ben Doimling,
No.
Rhonda Ferrari,
No.
Joe Justice,
Aye.
Brenda McComb,
No.
and I vote no as well. With that, the motion without consensus does not carry, and we will move on. My understanding is that we might have another motion possible. Carla Chambers.
So Chair Kelly, I move the board postpone consideration of the state forester's recommendation contained in agenda item 7 until such time as the state forester identify a specific funding plan to assure the revenues received by the State Forest Division are sufficient to cover the costs of implementing a new FMP that satisfies the requirements of the draft HCP.
Okay.
Sorry, I second that.
We have a motion made and seconded by Carla Chambers and seconded by Joe Justice. And is there conversation on this motion? And would you be able to provide me a written copy since I'm supposed to read?
I can give you a copy, yeah. Proposed discussion with the legislature is not a firm commitment to a funding plan. And I think we owe it to the people that have testified, the people that will lose mills, jobs, livelihood, you know, economic infrastructure, to the employees of this department. This department is going to be impacted as heavily as these counties are. And being transparent and forthright with the employees of this department is equally as important. And we don't have a funding plan here. And just talking to the legislature is hope, but that's not a plan. And I think we need for this size of decision, we need a financial model to accompany it.
Go ahead.
I agree, Carla. I think it's poor policy if we're unwilling to go back and try to adjust this to achieve greater financial certainty. I think it's simply poor policy to enter into this big of a policy decision without understanding the long-term funding model for this department and for what's happening with the counties, quite frankly. I think that's just simply poor policy.
Go ahead, Brenda.
So thank you, Carla and Joe for that. I also am somewhat concerned about the future financial viability for the agency. But I'm also concerned about prolonging this seemingly inevitably, infinitely, before we finally come up with a decision. And so I'm really concerned that we push this out further in time without a resolution, without a decision, and frankly, spend a lot more money in the meantime, maybe coming up with nothing that's any better than what we have now. And I think what we have now is good. I think it's a good plan. Granted, we need to figure out the finances, but it's a good.
Yeah, I guess I would comment that a vote for this motion is a vote to stay with take avoidance permanently because we don't control the purse strings. The legislature does. At the end of the day, we will not be able to come up with a management plan on our own that is going to reduce harvest to the level that we can get an HCP passed on our own. We simply can't do that. So that, to me, this is I care about the finances here like the rest of you, and I understand the implications. But how are we supposed to how are we supposed to do this when we don't have the power to do it?
So Chair Kelly, I just want to remind this board on 2 occasions, the Department of Justice in that room over there has told us very clearly that we cannot commit future legislatures to financial commitments. So I think we want to really think about that. It's not like that was a soft, maybe. They said we do not have the ability to obligate future legislatures. So it demands a financial plan accompany this policy.
Sure, Ben.
Just briefly, Ben Doimling for the record. I too am very interested in finding a firmer financial footing for the department as well as all of our partners on this. I'm firmly committed to doing this work as we go forward. And Brenda, Carla, I completely agree with you. It is not great to just have aspirations for future work of the legislature, and that's what it is. But there is only so much that we as a board can do about that. And I'm firmly committed to doing everything that we can, which means continuing work on the FMP, which is going to get us in that direction, and continuing to advocate as strongly as we can for firmer financial footing. So, but delaying the HCP isn't going to help us do that financial work.
Okay, in preparation for a vote, Carla, on my behalf, would you restate the motion?
Chair Kelly, I move the board postpone consideration of the state forester's recommendation contained in agenda item number 7 until such time as the state forester identify a specific funding plan to assure the revenues received by the State Forests Division are sufficient to cover the costs of implementing a new FMP that satisfies the requirements of the draft HCP.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Carla Chambers, seconded by Joe Justice, and we will do a roll call vote on that at this point. With that, Liz Agpawa.
Chair Kelly, I vote yes.
Carla Chambers.
Aye.
Ben Doimling.
No.
Chandra Ferrari.
No.
Joe Justice.
Aye.
Brenda McComb. And I'm a no as well. Okay, with that, motion did not carry.
Chair Kelly, I too have a motion, a short one. Yes.
You betcha.
Okay, and I will give you this.
All right,
At
go
the
ahead.
bottom. I move that the board postpone consideration of the state forester's recommendation contained in agenda item 7 until it receives a letter of advice as to whether the department is currently in violation of OAR 629-035-0036B, the 2010 FMP, by virtue of failure to generate sufficient revenue to implement the current FMP. So a letter.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Liz Agpawa and seconded by Joe Justice. Conversation, perhaps you could explain it a little more.
Yes, I can. I think we heard yesterday from the report on the legislature that there was a bill that was moving forward. And and it had gone to the point where there was a problem with the trust funds, and that wasn't clarified, and they went all the way through and then had to, go back. So this is really just a letter as to determine if we are somehow on, shaky ground with that. So that's what it is. That's what we're looking, is a letter of advice.
I'll second that motion.
It's already been seconded.
Okay, I'll second again, Joe.
I guess as a point of process on something like that, it would have been great to bring that forward. And if we agreed that we needed to have executive session and with council, we would have had that opportunity. But obviously, that hasn't happened. So further discussion on the motion? Not hearing further discussion, I will once again get us ready for a roll call. I would like you to please, on my behalf, restate
Yes.
that motion.
Happily, Chair. I move the board postpone consideration of the state forester's recommendation contained in Agenda Item 7 until it receives a letter of advice as to whether the department is currently in violation of OAR 629-035-0030 6B, the 2010 FMP, by virtue of failure to generate sufficient revenue to implement the current FMP.
Thank you. Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. We'll do a roll call vote. And Liz Akpawa.
I vote yes.
All right. Carla Chambers.
Aye.
Ben Doimling.
No.
Sandra Ferrari.
No.
Joe Justice.
Aye.
Brenda McComb. And my vote is no as well. And so that motion does not carry again on a divided vote. Okay, so I think we are back to the original proposed motion from the state forester. Okay, the proposed motion is take actions necessary to finalize the Western Oregon State Forest Habitat Conservation Plan as drafted and work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries to complete the HCP and obtain the associated incidental take permits. Completion of the HCP will include the minor changes made since the release of the public draft in March 2021 and other minor changes needed to obtain the incidental take permits. It will not include significant changes to the conservation actions as currently drafted. Model management outcomes that the board can use to discuss trade-offs and inform the setting of performance measure targets to be used to direct initial implementation of the FMP that relies upon the HCP for ESA compliance. We have a motion.
Chair Kelly, I move to adopt that recommendation.
Okay. Ben has made a motion. Is there a second?
A second.
Brenda McComb has seconded a motion. Discussion. Okay, not hearing any discussion, I will ask the board, we'll do a roll call and ask the board to vote on the state forester's recommendation. Liz Akpawa.
Chair Kelly, Liz Akpawa votes no.
Carla Chambers.
No.
Ben Doimling.
Yes.
Sandra Ferrari.
Yes.
Joe Justice.
No.
Brenda McComb. Yes. And I vote yes as well. And with that, the motion passes on a divided vote. And with that, we are done with item 7. And we'll move on here quickly to item 8, the board meeting wrap up. So I'd like all of you, if interested and willing, to share any reactions to what we've done today, what we've heard, um, and anything around process, anything at all. And this is our moment of, go ahead.
Ben Doimling for the record. I just want to thank all the board members. I firmly respect everybody's thoughts and feelings on this. We came to this, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I just thank you all for your perspectives on this, and I firmly appreciate those.
Yeah, thank you all for hanging in there without a bathroom break so far.
Yeah, I just want to say that, first of all, thanks to everybody for coming today. I know this has been really, really difficult for many of you. And this has been, in my 5.5 years, and Joe as well, clearly the most difficult time and decision that we faced. This is consequential. And it weighed heavily on my mind for a long time, and I know it's weighed heavily on the minds of other board members here. And it's just been a difficult time, and I know it's difficult for you too. So hope everybody can understand our positions, and as Ben said, respect one another in the process.
We're a pretty sober group. And I certainly want to repeat what Ben says and what I tried to say earlier is that we will weather this. I think we're strong, and I firmly believe we have a whole lot more that we agree about. So I'll just wrap up by thanking everybody who presented, everybody who testified, board members, public, everyone who's tuned in, and for ODF staff and all the work that they've done and get little credit for, and lots of criticism, of course, that comes with public service. And again, we just really appreciate the people who have come out to testify. And hearing no further closing comments, I will adjourn this meeting of March 7th.